Hello. This is one of a series of videos on the resource mobilization perspective and the Babi movement, this one dealing with the social environment. The paper on which this is based was one that I wrote with Moojan Momen back in 1986, called the Babi movement, a resource mobilization perspective. So we're going to deal with social structure first of all. The expansion of any social movement occurs within an existing social structure. Social networks, group interests, means of communication, and systems of social control all form part of the given environment. In the case of the Babis, the relatively unintegrated nature of Iranian society was of crucial importance. 3 times the size of France or California, divided by mountains and vast tracts of semi-desert, and possessed in the 19th century of no modern means of communication, Iran was only nominally a unitary state. Centrifugal forces of localism and of ethnic and religious diversity necessarily limited Babi expansion and led to considerable diversity of local situations. Under the circumstances, although the Babis were largely confined to the peoples of Iran's Shi'i heartland, the construction of a new, more or less unified national religious movement during the course of a few years was an impressive organizational achievement. The expansion of the movement reflected existing social divisions and was variously related to putative group interests. Existing networks of communication were effectively utilized. When the movement was prescribed, however, the Babis' lack of communicative control rendered them powerless to defend their public image in the face of the increasingly hostile myth-making of their opponents. Besides relative lack of social integration, 19th century Iran was structurally conducive to the emergence of what Neil Smeltzer has termed value-oriented movements. That is, movements concerned not with reformist change, but with the radical transformation of basic social values and institutions. As sociologists know, Smeltzer's work predates the development of the resource mobilization perspective. The characteristics of such structural conduciveness included the close interconnections between the major social institutions and between these institutions and the prevailing value system. For example, religion and politics were not separated. A challenge to one part of the system thus readily became a challenge to all. Therefore, any major religious movement readily assumed political significance, as in the case of Babism, regardless of its adherents' intentions. The absence of means for most of the population, this is the second characteristic, the absence of the means for most of the population to express their grievances, which inclined them to support movements which postulated total change. In such circumstances, economic and political demands were easily joined to programs of religious change. We can note this, but it's not so clearly applicable in the Iranian case. There were other means of expressing discontent by the population. Although in the case of the Babis, the exact relationship between such factors may remain controversial, their presence occasions no surprise. Weak social control. According to traditional social movement theory, social movements are most likely to emerge when existing holders of power either encourage their emergence or are unable to apply effective social controls. Effective action can prevent a movement from developing into a significant threat to the established order, albeit that the costs of such action can be high. In the case of the Babi movement, no overall effective action was applied to prevent the movement's emergence and initial expansion. Divided amongst themselves, neither clerical nor secular authorities made any decisive moves until the Babis were well established. As a result, the costs of extirpation were correspondingly greater. The ulama. In the case of the religious authorities, the Shi'i ulama were weakly structured to oppose any perceived heresy. In the absence of a unified national hierarchy, individual clerical leaders made their own variant responses to the new movement. Even in a single locality, the response was often diverse. Only when a cleric combined his antagonism with a secure local dominance, as did Karim Khan in Kerman, was Babi expansion halted. Elsewhere, the diversity of response worked in the Babi's favor. Even in the face of official condemnations for unbelief, the continued sympathy or tolerance by some clerics at the local level could prevent effective persecution. In Qazvin, the power of the vehemently anti-Sheikhi and anti-Babi mujtahid Haji Mullah Muhammad Taqi Barakani was not sufficient to prevent the growth of an active, albeit semi-secret, Babi cell. As to the secular authorities, their initial response was similarly diverse and ineffective. When the Babi missionaries were cautious in their work and provoked no public disorder, local governors were generally content to let them be. The underlying relationship between secular and religious authorities was often antagonistic in any case, even if a particular official perceived the heterodox nature of Babi teaching. He might well relish the prospect of clerical discomfiture. Another factor which needs to be considered is patrician politics of the local elites. These might give the Babis powerful friends as well as important opponents, such that local opposition was ineffective, as in Shiraz. Opposition. Although severe opposition can crush a movement, opposition may also be useful to a movement in increasing the commitment of its members and in attracting the attention of the wider public. Even when opposition leads to members being killed, as long as the human and other organizational responses of the movement are not overwhelmed, such opposition is liable to facilitate movement growth. Such certainty was the case with the Babis. Emerging in a religious culture which glorified heroic martyrdom, the Babis encountered a mounting force of ill-coordinated opposition. Distinctions between the pious faithful and the ungodly were thus reinforced, giving rise to a fervor of resistance which was to terrify their opponents at the conflicts of Tabasi, Zanjan, and Neyriz. Only when these lengthy struggles were concluded and an extensive and bloody suppression of the movement instituted was that fervor finally overwhelmed. That's what I'm going to say for the moment. Many thanks for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons for their encouragement and support. You're very welcome to support my channel. Like and share the videos, comment on them if you will. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. I'll give Patreon and PayPal links below if you want to provide practical support. Next week, we'll talk about strategy and goals. Have a good day.